naming Twitter streets for charity, rickrolling the iPhone as a virus, it's not already. Also, Modern Warfare 2 hits the streets with some drama, and Rupert Murdoch is going to erase himself from the internet, as it were. We'll talk about that with the Pocket Lint guys, Duncan Gear and Dan Sung, up next on TechV. Times are tough, so save time and money by skipping business trips and using GoToMeeting. Visit gotomeeting.com/techpodcast and get 30 days for free. It's been a wild week, as it always is, and like last week, we talked to the guys from Pocket Lint. This week, we're hearing Rupert Murdoch's looking to change things up a little bit. He actually wants to hide his content from Google and make people pay for the content, so only people who know about the Wall Street Journal or the Times of London or numerous publications would be able to get access. Duncan, what's your take on this? I mean, it seems kind of like an interesting move. I don't know if it's actually going to work, but what's your take?
I think interesting is quite a kind way of putting it. I'm I'm not quite convinced that it's going to pay off for him. The newspapers on the web get a vast amount of their traffic from Google, and chopping that off seems like a recipe for disaster in terms of ad revenues.
Well, he's hoping, I think part of it is he hopes that he could maybe splinter off his audience into a more core group, so maybe he could raise how much he charges just by saying, it's just this, narrow demographic. Dan, do you think that's the case? I mean, do you think that's actually going to work?
No, I don't think it's going to work. I mean, I see where he's going with it, but I feel like more of it's born out of frustration than anything else. Sort of playing devil's advocate, I can kind of see that there's maybe a core of people who want really good factual information, the kind that you can really trust from, say, the Times or something like that. But I think that's probably more an older generation, or it's way too niche to really make the kind of money that he's after.
I mean, realistically, it's a short-term thing. It's a short-term strategy. And if it works, I mean, it'll work for a couple of years. But to me, it's like you splinter off your audience, and I don't know how long you can stay relevant. I don't know. I mean, Duncan, any other pieces of the story that you think people might not understand right away?
Well, I mean, it's another thing that's quite interesting is he's accusing sort of sites like the BBC. He's wildly saying things like he's going to sue the BBC for stealing stories. And I mean, can you really steal news? Can you steal facts? If the content is replicable elsewhere and consumers can get it elsewhere for free, then why would they pay?
Yeah, I mean, it's this commodity news, right? It's difficult to say, you can only get this from them, or I don't know. To me, it's a short-term strategy. We'll have to see how it works out in the long term. Other stuff we're talking about this week, Modern Warfare 2 hits on Tuesday, which is today for some of you. Gamers are really excited about it. You got it right there. So, I mean, gamers have been really excited about this. It's the next installment in the Call of Duty franchise. It's sort of a spin-off. Anyway, without going into the specifics of the naming convention, Dan, what's your kind of take on the launch? And we're hearing also that there's some controversy surrounding the launch. Can you kind of explain some of that as well?
Yeah, that's right. Well, there was a member of Parliament for Leicester East who saw the trailer for the game on YouTube, I think it was. And there's a particular part of the game where soldiers have to, they're undercover as terrorists, and they actually have to shoot some civilians. So this has now been blown way out of proportion after he stood up in Parliament and said, I don't know if this is the right kind of thing. A newspaper here, the Daily Mail's really picked up on this, and they're talking about claims of actually for you to plan terrorist activity. So it's really, spiraled out of control in that wonderful kind of media way.
Yeah, I love it. So, I mean, realistically, let's put this into perspective. I mean, there's someone else coming to their defense, though. It's not all arguments, right, Duncan?
Yeah, that's right. Before we go on though, I'll correct one thing that Dan said. On the level that he's talking about, you don't actually have to shoot anybody. You can just accompany the other terrorists through this airport while they're shooting people. The game never forces you to do that. And I think that is quite an important point in this case. But yeah, no, as you were saying, Tom Watson, who's a Labour MP, I'm not entirely sure which constituency he represents, but he's formed a pressure group called Gamers Voice. He formed it yesterday, sort of through his Twitter account, and it's already up to 9,000 people.
Got it. So I mean, is this someone that's credible in the UK, or is this more just someone who's an outlier? I mean, how much are people going to look to him and say, he's someone I believe in, or I mean, do you guys? Obviously I'm an ignorant American. Can you kind of fill me in?
He's got a reputation as
I believe
MP. Sorry, Dan, to talk over you. He's certainly done stuff in terms of combating three strikes legislation and trying to get government departments to upgrade from Internet Explorer 6 and use more open source software and stuff like that. So he's got a reputation for that kind of work.
Got it. So he's kind of the geeks guy of choice.
Yeah.
Dan, what were you gonna say?
Well, I think if I can just come in there, I think he's actually the Minister for Digital Affairs or some sort of title like that.
Got it.
That's his job. That's what he does.
So he's actually
So
he
he's
has some clout.
yeah, very much so. Thank God.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I mean, before the show we were talking and we mentioned that Fox News hasn't quite got a hold of this in the U.S. yet, so we'll have to see if this starts to blow up here as well as the game is released. Other stuff that we're talking about today, an iPhone rickroll that's not so pleasant. Apparently, last week we heard about some iPhone jailbreakers who actually had a Swiss or some
Dutch.
a Dutch hacker who had basically held their phones for ransom. This week we're hearing about a new iPhone virus that changes your wallpaper to Rick Astley and has a rickroll sort of thing going on here. Now, Dan, how dangerous is this virus? Is this kind of something people really need to be worried about?
It's incredibly non-dangerous unless you happen to be allergic to the sight of Rick Astley. That's basically all it does. It's there really to point out a flaw that you need to change your password, the default password on your jailbroken iPhone. Otherwise, you're open to such kind of hacking.
Yeah, and I feel like this is not the first or last we'll see of this. It's definitely
No, I think very interestingly though, it's probably the beginning. It's really quite a big beginning of what's out there. You look at platforms like iPhone, and the fact that at the moment it's not really a massive issue because no one's really doing a lot of their banking or shopping and stuff on their phones, but it's there for the future.
Yeah,
this is where malware could well hit.
and theoretically, I mean, we've had mobile phone. People have talked about Bluetooth exploits or sort of these fake viruses with older phones, which really didn't do much other than just kind of annoy you, or maybe at worst, could delete your contacts or call all your contacts or text them with a dirty message or something. But we haven't really seen, a proper exploit. I don't know, Duncan, Dan was kind of saying this is maybe the beginning. Do you think that, I mean, this only affects jailbroken iPhones to be sure, so these are people who at least know what they're doing to begin with. I mean, do you think that this is sort of we'll see a lot more exploits like this, and how do you think people should maybe prepare for this, if they can?
Well, I mean, I think as Dan said, it's something that's going to be on the increase in the future as people start, putting their banking details, their passwords. Already, a lot of people are using, they're putting their email passwords on their phones. So it's relatively easy from that point to get to a point where you've got access to more, important things. It's a gradual process, but as you said, it's not quite an issue yet, especially considering this affects only a tiny subset of users, most of whom are in Australia.
Yeah.
Until there's actually a malicious virus that comes out, then it's not going to be such of an issue.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, right now, virus makers, I think, are so concerned with creating these botnets that actually, cause spam and lots of things like that, that I don't think they really care about mobile devices as much, just because there's no real payday. I mean, you infect a mobile device, and it's hilarious because you have Rick Astley everywhere. But that's kind of the extent of it, so we'll see where things change. Lastly, we want to talk about a Palestinian street which has been named after a Twitter account. Duncan, what's going on here?
There's a Palestinian refugee camp called Askar in the West Bank, and there's a charity there that sort of helps the kids in this refugee camp. And what it's doing is it's selling the street names for charity. So it's inviting people to buy up a street. They can name it whatever they want. And one enterprising young guy, a Dutch guy, has decided to name a street after his Twitter account.
Oh, that's fun. So now there's a street called at Arn El Fased or something.
Arjan El Fased, I think his name.
So we'll put that on, of course, at TechViews. If you want to check out the picture, we'll have links over to Pocketlint as well. Guys, thanks for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Duncan Gear from Pocketlint, and also Dan Sung, who turned into a screensaver. Go figure. I'm Randall Bennett, and don't forget, you can catch us on iTunes or on YouTube or everywhere. So make sure you catch us somewhere. See you later.